Please welcome Julie H.
Well, hello there. I am an alcoholic, a member of the Cornerstone Group, and my problem is Julie. I'm so delighted to be here with all of you. I have to be honest, I've been really emotional about this all day. John told me about this in, I think it was November, and I haven't slept since, so I'm hoping a good message comes out today. I'm going to do my very best. I actually started listening to the speakers today, and because I'm human, and in recovery, I started comparing. Saying, oh no, I have no message. Listen to these people. They're so good. What am I going to do? And then my ego takes over, right? So I go back to the hotel room. I'm thinking, I have to go pray. I need a moment, right? I have like a panic attack. And so I go and sit down and I breathe for a few minutes. And it's, I feel these waves of being very overwhelmed and I'm having troubles connecting. And my boss phones. Like right at that moment, who I got sober with, who I love very much. And she phoned to congratulate me on an accomplishment that I heard about yesterday. She says, you worked so hard. You really deserve this. I just wanted to say congratulations. And, instantaneously, right? God showed up, because God shows up through people. And I just exhaled. And I'm so delighted to be here today. And my sobriety date is July 21st, 2010. And for the grace of God, I haven't felt it necessary to have a drink since then. And life has happened because life is hard and life can be unfair. But, there are so many joyous things that have happened. And I've learned to look at life today through a lens of gratitude and instead of a lens of lack. Because that's where I used to live. Everything was always better on the other side. If only I had that. If you had my life, you'd drink too. By the time I got here, I was just so angry and so, and actually my counselor in the treatment center, which was 12-step based, thank goodness, was kind enough to point out that it wasn't anger, it was rage. I remember sitting down, as a matter of fact, telling him a story about a resentment I had to one of the guys I was in the rehab with. And he says, I was having all these thoughts this morning on the way, walking back from the gym. And he says, well, tell me about that. I said, well, he was in front of me and I grabbed him by his little head and I picked him up and I spun him around and I tossed his body off and I was crushing his head in my hand. He said, yeah, that's rage. That's not anger. That's rage. I go, oh yeah, I guess that would be rage, right? But I had no idea. That was the only tool I had left. It came from a home that had a lot of neglect. My mom was very unavailable. She had a lot of postpartum depression and had a relationship that she had built with my sister who came before me, and I kind of felt left in the dust. And my sister, speaker was talking about it earlier on, was this tall, beautiful, she was a model when she was younger, and I was like this rangy, had buck teeth, really skinny, couldn't sit still, bouncing off walls. Got picked on and beat up in school. Like my inventory, my resentment list started really early. That story that we put together to explain why we just have to constantly hurt ourselves and others, because we have to come up with some story to rationalize that behavior. It just doesn't make any sense, right? And my dad always talked about he was very British, but also worked a couple of jobs trying to take care of his family. So, but he was the one I was close to, but I never got to see him. He used to say it's about respect. Get respect. You need to respect me. You need to respect your elders. It's all about respect. And when I got a little older, I had this really distorted and twisted version of what respect was. I thought respect was power, right? So I was just constantly seeking some kind of power. So class clown came first, right? And then doing everything I could to fit in with whomever I could. When that didn't work, because that's painful, I just decided that I don't need any of you. I got this. I'm good. Right? Alcohol, when I was 14 years old, fed that nicely because it pads off, shaves off the edges, right? And I became not violent, but certainly aggressive in the way I held myself and the not needing you, and the way I would speak to people, and I was just repelling people on a regular basis because I thought that would get me the respect and the power because I had control over you. Like, just delusional, right? When I was 14 years old, my life was a lot of I'll show you and a lot of really bad decisions. Nothing was very well thought out. And when I was 15 years old, I decided I was going to run away from home, punish my parents. It's probably the best thing that ever happened. Think about it at the time. And I ran away to Edmonton. I'm from the West. I'm from Vancouver. That's where I grew up. And I went to Edmonton, and again, not one of those very well thought out things. It's very cold there. As a matter of fact, I remember correctly, it was minus 57 one year that I was there. And I remember hiding in a phone booth, crying my eyes out because I thought I was going to freeze to death on my way home because, I didn't ask for help. I didn't, And I ran away from home, and it was, if I admitted, to come to phone my parents and ask if I'd come home, meant I had to admit I was wrong, and it meant that I had to apologize. And my pride was wouldn't let me do that, right? Because I don't need them. I got this, right? And I stayed away for a number of years and got into a whole lot of trouble, and drinking was always at the very center of that. I didn't get into trouble every time I drank, but every time I got into trouble, I was drinking, right? And the decisions, they always say, well, I keep on hearing about, I was crazy because I was drinking all the time. Most of my bad decisions were to pick up a drink, and I did that when I was sober. But life felt, but from a very early age, too difficult to live without drinking. To me, unmedicated life was unbearable. And, trying to keep up that facade of being, a badass and, a punk, getting that street cred, starting to do some little bits of crime here and there and some crazy things. And, and then I started working in bars, and that fit along just nicely with the plan, right? I did eventually go back to BC, by the way. And, I met these this group of people, kind of a little criminal enterprise, and I thought that they were real badass and really tough, and I thought, yeah, I want to be like them, right? They're great. And so crime became a part of it. For them, violence was a part of it, not for me. And I at a very young age, I watched somebody being beaten to death, and that left a mark. I'm not sure that I ever really talked about that before I came into recovery, but it left a mark, and I remember a lot of drinking because of the sound of that. Stuck around for a really long time. And, I was about 18 years old. I worked in this bar, and there were some people I knew that used to talk about these crazy adventures they used to go on and crime. And I'm like, yeah, like the crime thing gets your respect, right? That street cred. Get that respect. People think I'm bad, I'm badass. You better respect me, right? Power. And so they used to talk about, going down to South America and doing these deals, sailing and doing some stuff in South America and moving things around. And I'm like, I want to do that, you guys. You ever need anybody? Like I'm filling out an application, right? Really trying to sell myself. Like, I'd be so good at that. A couple months later, I got a call to go down and do this. And I thought, yeah, I'm in, right? 3 days later, I'm on a plane. I'm flying to South America. Again, another not very well thought out idea, right? But I thought that would give me, do something like that. Well, people think I'm really bad, right? I'll get respect from people now, right? So unarmed with the facts about myself, right? I get down there, I'm terrified. I know I'm completely and utterly in over my head. There are people walking around with guns, and there are things going on there that were, I had no business being there. But, I was down there and I'm thinking, I can't say, I made a mistake. I have to go. I'll pay you back for the plane ticket. Yeah. So it didn't work out that way. So, a lot of things happen there. And I'm going to tell you a little story because I want to talk about how God has shown up in my life on a pretty regular basis. And we were, it was 1985, and it was Hurricane Hugo, and we were sailing up through Puerto Rico, and we were trying to outrun the hurricane. By the way, that's not a good idea. And we were coming from Puerto Rico to the Dominican Republic, and we caught what we thought was the tail end of the hurricane, and it blew the main sheet, and so we're kind of flailing around and can't pull it back down again. It's stuck up on the runners, and we're all of a sudden everything gets really calm. I'm thinking, oh, well, thank God the hurricane's over, right? The energy was palpable. I mean, every single hair on the back of my neck, on my body, was standing up because of the energy in the eye of the hurricane. And then I'm thinking that, okay, good, thank goodness. Whew, dodged a bullet. Nope, got to go back through the other wall on the other side of the hurricane. So we go through that, and we end up on a reef in the Dominican Republic, and we're smashing against the reef for about 17 hours, and I'm praying to God because, I'm like that foxhole God. Yep, right? I'm in it. So I know now we have to call Mayday because, I was more afraid of dying than I was going to jail at that point. So I get on the radio, and just before I have the radio in my hand, and I'm wedged between the chart table and some of the cowards in the galley, and we're hiding, holding onto the mast post because so many things are flying around that weren't buckled or screwed down, and it was terrifying, and the noise of 17 tons of steel smashing against the reef, and plus the walls starting to burst open, and it's filled with all kinds of things. And so I said a very humble prayer in that moment. I said, God, if you get me out of this one, I promise I'll never do this again. I don't know how I got down here. I know I made a mistake. And if you get me out of this, I'll never do this again. And we ended up breaking through that reef, and we ended up on the beach, and the Coast Guard did fly over, but they were busy in Puerto Rico, so thank God they didn't fly over for another little while. Saw that we were okay and left. I was like, oh. And so I go back home again shortly after we had a lot of cleanup involved in that, and a few months later I end up back home, and I get a phone call, and it's the people that I was working with, and they said, I got this other deal that we're working on. It's just a few weeks, and if you do come, the money's good, and blah blah blah, and come and join us. And I'm like, I remembered that prayer, right? And I really felt like God got me out of that, because there was no reason that we should have lived, and I should not have been arrested through that. And I said, you know what, I have so much going on right now because I was away for so long, I can't, So I didn't. And they went down to Florida to arrange this next deal they were talking about, and they both got pinched and spent 15 years in a federal penitentiary in Florida for conspiracy to commit. And my drinking went on. And I just gathered more resentments, and my only tools were like a hiding place and a hammer, right? And the only time I even felt remotely normal was when I was just completely and utterly obliterated. And I was talking to somebody the other day. It's funny because I used to say, no, I drank suicidally. I only drank to get drunk. It's all I wanted to do. And, I used to say I never tried to control it. I just went, I'm an alcoholic. It's how I drink. But I did. I spent an awful lot of time, because every time I would go out thinking, okay, just a couple. And then, after 3, I'd get the sweet spot. Got to maintain the sweet spot now, right? And then I would get past that and go, to heck with it. Every time I said to heck with it, I was admitting I was powerless. Every single time. Right? So I get married. At some point in here, I found, Prince Charming. He was a lovely man. I really thought that was the answer to my problems. I thought, my friends are going off. They're getting married. They're doing these things. I'll do normal things now. That life is over, right? So I get married. We have this beautiful little boy. I said my second humble prayer. I'm laying on the bed, and I'm looking at this little guy, and I'm thinking, wow, now things are going to be different, right? If I stayed sober through my pregnancy, thinking things are going to be okay. And I thank God for him in that moment, and Knew that God gave me that gift. And within 3 months, again, I was back to the races as much as I didn't want to. As much as I hated myself and as ashamed I was of nursing my son while I was doing these things. But I couldn't stop, and I felt like a monster, and I didn't know what to do. And the only thing to take away that kind of pain and shame is more. That marriage eventually ended, and it's funny, my family at one point started, I got that, like, the broken receiver thing I keep on hearing about in Alcoholics Anonymous, right? Like, I'm incapable of seeing love when it shows up, because I think it's supposed to look a certain way, like I'm supposed to know, right? No, that's not controlling, right? But I have this inability to receive and this inability to recognize it when it shows up, because countless people have shown up in my life to try to love me. Even those people that used to show up and say, you need to stop. You need to stop. You're hurting yourself, right? They have to go. Because I can live without them, but I didn't think I could live without this. I didn't think I could live without alcohol because I never had. So they had to go. I burned every single relationship to the ground that way. Because everybody loved me enough and was courageous enough to try to talk to me about my problem. Right? So my family tries to get together and have an intervention, and the only thing I can think of is, oh my God, they're going to compare stories. I'm so busted. That's all I thought about. And then rage. Then I wrote everybody off. And I took my son and I moved out of the province. I didn't care about his grandparents. I didn't care about his auntie. I didn't care about, his dad and I had split up at that point, and he had a contract somewhere else, so he was going anyway. Didn't care. Don't need you. I got this. So off I go. I take my son. I'm thinking I need to change careers. So I changed careers, so I'm working during the day now. Just found people to go for lunch with. I like to do 4 or 5 hour liquid lunches. Right now I'm picking up my son drunk from daycare. I got my first impairment when I was 18. Maybe that would have been a sign. At this point, I'm like 35. Still doing it. I know I managed to build myself a little bit of a career in there, and the only reason I built myself a little bit of a career in there is because I lied to get the job, and then I would leave about 11 and a half months in by the time the budget talks would show up. Right? I was working on somebody else's account list, doing really, really well, then I'd burn it to the ground, and then I would leave before the budget meetings would show up. Bouncing around, right? Managed to get a house in there, managed to lose that house, managed to get a car, managed to lose that car. I had such a resentment against my family, I hadn't talked to them in years. Nobody. I'll show them. What was I showing them? Right? And eventually I lost my house and was couch surfing for a while with my son. And it became unbearable because I knew I was a monster and I couldn't take care of him. But I tried to hold on for a number of years. So when he was, I think, 8, I'm not really sure, I would do things like leave him in the house and go get what I needed by himself when he was sleeping. I talk about these things because the shame that I felt and how much I hated myself when I got here is not a barrier to getting better. It doesn't matter what has happened to you in your life. Grace is available for everyone. It will meet you where you are, and it will never leave you where it found you. And there are no barriers to getting better here. So eventually I sent my son to his dad, who was living in Hawaii, and I was in Alberta, and I was going to get better. It was Christmas break. I was going to get better. I didn't have a plan, but I was going to get better. And when I dropped my son off at the airport and I was coming back, I'd lost my car, somebody gave me a ride. I thought, let's go have a drink. Actually, that's not really what I thought. I thought, let's go on a bender, because I won last bender, right? Because now I got to get better. It's like, it's like drinking who drank on the way to rehab. Detox rehab now, right? Okay. So I'm so happy this makes sense in this room. Right? Huh? And for the next 7 years, I stayed completely annihilated. I did not draw a sober breath. I was so ashamed of what I'd done, but I couldn't stop drinking to bring my son back. I also couldn't work anymore. I just became too sick. So I turned to crime again because it wasn't a difficult transition, right? So running credit cards, whatever it was, just, trying again to get that street cred back, right? I need to get some power. I need to get some respect. Because in that world, that's what you do. I was in and out of jail for a long time. Actually, one of my first AA meetings was in jail, and I went back to my cell, and I thought, okay, I think I had 47 days left on my sentence. And so I thought this one day at a time thing made a lot of sense to me, so I made 47. So I had 47 days worth of plans by the time I got out, because each of my last days that I was there, I made a plan what I was going to do for one day. Right? Not while I was in there, but when I got out. So I had 47 days worth of plans by the time I got out, because by the way, none of those days of plans included an AA meeting. Just included my brilliant thinking. And we all know where that got me. And I was drunk the first day. We all know how that ends, right? And eventually I was living in an abandoned house. Eventually I hadn't spoken to my family in 13 years. Eventually I tried to punch out a couple of security guards, and they knocked my front teeth out. Eventually I was just drinking to die because I didn't think people like me got better. And I had helped out this lady at one point, and actually helped her brother out. Must have been feeling good that day. And she never forgot that, and I had phoned her when I was actually in this relationship, and this relationship was just insane. It was exceptionally violent and life-threatening on a pretty regular basis. And one day this man that I loved so much strangled me to the point where I passed out. I didn't love him so much. I didn't know what that was. Strangled me to the point where I passed out, and when I came to, he wasn't there, and I crawled over to the window and I untaped the curtains, because that's what we did. Crawled around, looked like an animal in the dark. And I got on my knees. And I said my third humble prayer, and I said, God, I can't live this way anymore. Please help me. I'll do anything. I don't know why this happened. I don't know why I'm here. But I'm willing to do anything. And I managed to escape that situation. And called up this woman whose brother I had helped, and she said, "Well, come up to the house in a couple of days." And this seems like a good idea, right? Instead, my better idea was to go back to that guy. And she sent her very large husband down and grabbed me out of the house that day and took me up to her place. Thank God. And I walked into her kitchen, and at this point, I hadn't seen or spoken to my family in 13 years. And I walked in the kitchen, and there was my mother and my sister. And I knew in that moment my prayer was answered. I knew that God showed up for me. I felt carried. I felt like I was kind of having this out of body. I felt like I was the witness to this, and people were talking and I wasn't really paying attention. I didn't really know what was going on, and I just all of a sudden recognized that there were two very different conversations going on. One was run. Run. Because that's what I do. I get terrified and I run. And the other one was go. This is an intervention. Like, bless their hearts for coming back and doing that again after what I did to them the first time, really, right? That was the last time I spoke to any of them when I screamed and yelled at them for having an intervention. How dare you love me? Not this time. I looked at them in the middle of whatever they were doing, and I said, where's the car? We have to go now. I knew if we didn't, I'd die. And we went to this 12-step. And by the way, I'm here because my sister was a member of Al-Anon. And I think it's vital that I talk about that. Because without my sister and her involvement with Al-Anon and doing the 12 steps and having a sponsor and doing all the things that Al-Anon suggests, which are the same things that suggested in Alcoholics Anonymous, I would not be here today. So thank you, Al-Anon. Thanks, Lois. And so my sister did what she needed to do. She drove me, and then she detached with love, right? Took me to a 12-step recovery place. And, my sister says, sort of a little tidbit on what my legal situation was at when I came in. We're driving to the treatment center. My sister says, have you ever used my name to commit crime? And so the perfect alcoholic answer, why do you ask? She said, well, I came into the airport last night from California and they threw me in jail overnight. Like, thank God for step 9, right? Like, holy smokes. I had 14 warrants out for my arrest at that point. Went to this treatment center and willing. And I did 30 days there, and at the end of that treatment center, I was going to go back and save that guy. That was my plan. And these lovely women from AA said, let's go talk about that. We should talk about some ideas. They were delightful. They said, why don't you talk to your sister again and ask for a little more help? We'll sit with you. We'll hold your hand. And they did, and I phoned my sister and I asked for more help. And they sent me to a treatment center in Montreal. It was 3 months, and I was like, 3 months, Montreal! And my sister's like, do you have other plans? Is there something I don't know about? Like, I got no key, no card, no shit. I don't even have my own pair of shoes. I mean, And the work started. The work started in this treatment center. It was all about the steps, all about getting numbers, all about doing the work. And we started doing the work. And I started noticing things. I started noticing some coincidences. I started noticing like these little pebbles on my path, right? Some pretty extraordinary things started to happen. Some relationships started showing up. Some friendships started to be made. I mean, I tried to resist, but you guys just would not accept my resistance. You just kept coming at me with love. It was fantastic, right? I started recognizing God in everything. Because I didn't have a problem with the God idea. I just didn't have a relationship with God. And you all showed up to share your experience of how you created your relationship with the God. You didn't tell me to do anything. You just said you just have to be willing. I've never had to, pray for the willingness to be willing. That never happened. I was willing. Let's go. Let's go. Tell me what to do because I don't know how to live. I don't know how to have relationships. I don't know how to be a parent. I don't know how to be a sister. I don't know how to be a daughter. I don't know how to be a lady. I don't know how to be a human. I learned all of those things here. And I started my steps. And I said, as I said, my step 4 was, it kind of took the air out of all the reasons I had to drink, which was fantastic, right? And my step 5, my sponsor taught me how to sew up some of the ends of that, right? 6 and 7, well, I have this self-centered fear, and my character defects are like this arsenal I have that tries to protect that self-centered fear. It's my ego's defense, right? And I love what my old counselor used to say to me in rehab, you're defending the right to stay stupid. He had me. I couldn't say a word. I just was like, oh. And so, I I ended up staying in that treatment center for 11 and a half months. They were lovely. They kept saying, "Oh, just stay longer." I had nowhere to go. I'm like, "Oh, okay." So did 4 months of sober living there as well, and probably did about 1,000 meetings in my first year because it was the only place I could breathe. I got a little apartment. I got a little job at a supermarket part-time, and it was rough because I was, am I going to have a coffee this week or am I going to buy yogurt? But I still went to 3 meetings a day and took the bus, and it was okay because I knew I needed to get better, and I was willing to go to any length. I would have gone, it would nothing, a snowstorm, I would crawl across an entire city to go get booze. Am I willing to do that in my recovery? Yep. As I went through the steps, it's been the most beautiful experience, and of course the amends steps, willing. I've been willing all the way along. I feel so blessed. There were I didn't have any barriers left. I had burned everything to the ground. And living in 10, 11, and 12, I can't, he can, I'll let him is step 1, 2, and 3. The getting myself out of the way and learning about myself. Who am I? From 4 to 9 and 10, 11, and 12, living in that because I have to keep living in those steps because I'll tell you, the person I was, that person's going to drink again. I need to have an entire psychic change like it talks about in the book, or I'm going to drink again. That thinking will get me drinking. So I stay lit 10, 11, and 12. I stay in the middle. I have a sponsor. One of my sponsor's favorite lines, well, okay, so the moment's passed, you can't punch them in the face anymore, so let's talk about the solution. I'm like, okay. I have sponsees, I have women I work with, it's amazing, right? I got to make an amend to my family. My son was out of my life for almost 7 years. I hadn't seen him. My son's 27 today. He has a beautiful relationship with a girl named Alice, who's just a sweetheart. I love her. Could have gone either way. I'm really happy it went that way. I'm in my son's life. I'm a mom. My dad has passed away in my recovery, but in my recovery, I got to make an amend to my dad. He had a number of strokes and he had dementia and he was living in a home, and I'd never seen my father like that. He was the oak tree. I missed a lot. But I showed up because I wanted to make an amend to my dad and say goodbye and say hello. And he didn't know who I was. He thought I was my sister, but I didn't care because he knew I was one of his daughters, and that was enough for me. Right? I remember sitting there with my dad, and we were in this little atrium, and there was like these little orchids and flowers all around, and I just was holding onto my dad's arm and just so happy to be there with him, sober, and, just looking at him. And he looked at me and he goes, "Oh my God, you're my Julie." And he sat with me knowing who I was, knowing I was sober, knowing I was there with him, for him, to love him. And I got about 2-3 minutes and then he was gone again, but God gave me a little window. That's what God does, right? May not show up the way you think it's going to, but if I'm willing to live in the here and now and practice the principles of this program, things show up. That little panicky thing I was going through, and my boss phoning me tonight, she phoned me because I went back to school. I had a grade 7 education when I showed up here, and I went back to school, and I texted her yesterday the email I got from the school letting me know that I'm now a social worker. That's because of you guys. That's because of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's because of the grace of God. And for that, I'm eternally grateful. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Julie. And now for our second panelist from the Keystone Group in Kitchener, Ontario, please welcome Stephanie S.
Oh gosh. I might just sit up here and ugly cry, and I'm spiritually fit today, so if you guys have to leave for dinner, I'm not going to be offended. 2 weeks ago I probably would have, but I'm good. Yeah, I'm Stephanie and I'm an alcoholic, and I'm having an emotional time as well. Very honored, very grateful, very fortunate to be standing here, like sober, relatively sane. Right. But, you know, I was kind of reflecting. I'm going to just ugly cry. So anyway, it's just really gratitude. On the way up here, my daughter called, she did. She messaged me and said she was having a hard time and that she thought she had to go to the hospital. She struggles with things. And I was annoyed at first. Of course, of all days, today's the day. Right? Don't you know I have something important to do? I didn't say any of that stuff to her. But anyway, you know, I picked up the phone and I called her and we had a conversation and we were able to talk through it. And I didn't have to turn the car around and go save her because I can't. The other day I had a conversation with my eldest daughter who lives out in BC. And I just let her know what's going on and what I've been up to and what I get to do today. And she said, you know, I'm so proud of you. I really wish one day I could hear you speak. And why that is so special is what I'm about to share with you now and what alcoholism did to my family and just, you know, where my life is today as a result of willingness and a trust in God and anyway, I don't even know. So I started drinking when I was 13, and, you know, I lived a pretty reckless life. My mom came to Alcoholics Anonymous when I was 7, so you guys are no strangers to me. I remember going to AA at 7 years old and just feeling the love, and that's what I felt when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous. It was familiar to me, but I picked up a drink at 13, and I never went to AA until I needed it. And from 13 to 20, I drank pretty heavily. A lot of stuff happened in that time. You know, I just think about my 13-year-old self and the places I went and the positions I put myself in. Man, oh man, to say that I'm lucky to be alive is like an understatement. But I got pregnant at 20 years old, and I quit drinking. Right? I quit drinking. I stopped. It was not even a thing. I'm pregnant. I need to stop drinking. And I did, not really understanding the progression, right? How could I possibly understand or even, because I knew I had a problem with drinking, like I knew it was bad, but Louisa, hi again. But yeah, so I got, you know, so my point is I stopped drinking, the disease progressed, and I picked up a drink after 4 years. And within, you know, and that would have been like, within 4 years I lost 3 children, right? Like it just, I went down hard. And with that consequence, I left my children, you know. There's a whole long story to it, but, you know, I could not get sober. The powerlessness, unmanageability of alcoholism, I could not get sober. I could not stay sober. No human power was going to get me sober. And I left for 10 years. And that's why the fact that my phone rang today, my daughter asking me for help, you know, and my other daughter telling me she's proud of me, like, man, oh man, like, I didn't do that, you know. So that's just a really special thing. And sometimes I can take that for granted, you know. Sometimes I can take life for granted, sobriety for granted. I got to Alcoholics Anonymous the last time, April 12th, 2009, right? So I'm coming up to 14 years. And I think that's freaking a miracle. I used to take a lot of credit for that. I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, and for the first 5 years, I honestly didn't do any of the work. I got to Alcoholics Anonymous thinking that drinking was the problem, because it's obvious that drinking's the problem, and if I just stop drinking, then things. But how do you explain it, right? Like one day I can't stop drinking. I wake up and I'm in a different province. My life is crumbling around me. I don't have my family. I don't have my kids. I'm living in a tent behind a bread factory. It's like life is, and the obsession was just gone one day. And that's a miracle. But I didn't feel the need to do any work, right? I still had a lot of answers. I went to a lot of meetings, and for 5 years, my life looked like. So I quit drinking, and my life got better. The outside circumstances of my life definitely improved, right? I wasn't going to jail. I was slowly building a relationship with my children and my family, and things were coming together. But when, I think that's sustainable for so long, because it tells me in my book that, and I believe it in the book, is that if I'm a hopeless alcoholic, I'm suffering from an illness which only a spiritual solution will conquer. It also tells me that I'm constitutionally incapable of being honest with myself. But it also tells me that I can have an experience and get well if I have the capacity to be honest with myself. That's confusing. And then in step 5 in the 12 and 12, it tells me that the AA's 12 steps go against every single natural desire. And I'm like, well, do I even have a chance? Do I even have a chance? And at 5 years without a drink, I say a lot of things happen in my kitchen and in my car. I'm standing in my kitchen. Alcohol got me here. Alcohol beat me into a surrender but alcoholism beat me into submission. For 5 years, I didn't really understand what the true definition of alcoholic was. I thought it was somebody who drank too much, and if I just put down the drink, then I'm fine. Lots of bowling, lots of coffees, lots of social clubs, and thank God for that, because that got me through. But at 5 years sober, I surrendered, and for the first time, and this is just this disease, my mind, right? My mind is just out to get me. This disease wants to keep me separate, sick, and just apart from. And I remember standing in my kitchen, and I was like, you know what, I will do anything. At this point, God, please help me. And then I got this idea to call this woman who I knew, carried this big book around and, preached a lot of stuff. And as quick as that thought came in, the other thought came in, well, you don't need to do that, right? So I got this sickness going on, and God helped me, and then the sickness telling me that I don't need to really do that. But at that point, I mustered up enough courage to pick up the phone and call her and ask her. And that was my journey into the 12 steps and the beginning of doing a lot of things that I didn't really want to do, doing a lot of things that I was scared of doing, taking a risk, I couldn't imagine, willingness, right? You ever ask the newcomer, you willing to go to any length? I know people ask me that, and I was willing to go to any length, but if I would have known what any length was, right? That's, a pretty scary proposition. But it just started little by little. Yeah, this happened the other night too. I said a prayer a couple weeks ago before I went up to do a presentation at my home group, and the prayer was, say the prayer every week. Please help me set aside everything I think I know, which is a lot. And God took away everything that I thought I knew, and I'm just I have nothing. I hope that's not happening right now, because it's a really crappy time. But I talk about, so willingness. Willingness indispensable, I don't know. I'm just going to get current. How about that? I'm coming up to 14 years sober, and I can suffer. You know, I used to have this idea of what recovery looked like, what it should feel like, what it should be, and I wouldn't be honest about where I was at. My pride and my ego would want to keep me stuck. I have a hard time, not today, but, I got a willingness to be honest, the willingness to get vulnerable, the willingness to be quiet, the willingness to make these amends, the willingness to show up and the willingness to be uncomfortable. I'm really uncomfortable. I am really uncomfortable, and I've been really uncomfortable probably for the last 6 months with moments of peace. I have a disease that's not going to tell me that I want to have a drink. That's not how alcoholism comes in. It doesn't come in the back door and say, go have a drink. It comes in other forms. About October, I went on a trip, and I was gone for a month, so I was quite disconnected from my friends and my community. And then I came back, and my disease said, well, you don't need to go to meetings. Just protect your peace, right? Just protect your peace. So I stayed home, and I just kind of went about my thing. And then I went to Cuba for a week by myself. Yeah. And I felt fine. I felt good. I was kind of concerned that I couldn't get to any Zoom meetings because apparently Zoom's banned there. But, I have this brain that tells me I'm still okay, and I still feel okay, and I'm okay. And during that time I got really, really sick. I got really, really sick because prior to that oh my God, this is just, I have to be honest. I just have to be honest where I am because I know there's probably someone in this room that's probably struggling too. And they're like, what the hell's wrong with me? I'm sober. I shouldn't be feeling, thinking, and, acting like this. Maybe there's not. I don't know. Maybe you guys are all just well. But prior to that, I started kind of I love Alcoholics Anonymous, and God, oh God, it's I love it. But I started kind of getting away from the fidelity of the book, and I started kind of exploring other spiritual things, which is great. It tells us to kind of step outside of the big book and see what other people have to offer. But I took it to a whole nother level. And that's a scary place to be. It's a scary place to be when you think you got a direct connection to God. When you think that nothing you think, nothing you feel, don't believe anything you think, feel. I get the whole concept of that, but I took it to another level. Because if I'm not believing anything I think or feel or anything that's happening, then I'm not checking myself. And I'm starting to believe the delusion. So what happened was I went away for about a month and a half, and I came back, and I just started getting sick. And it was everybody else. And I started feeling restless, irritable discontent. I didn't want to drink, but I started to feel lonely. I started to feel, oh my God, the self-pity and the depression. But I couldn't really reach out for help. This thing had me. Some of the things I've learned in the last little bit is I have a real deep, unhealthy need, desire for security, power, control, esteem, and sometimes when I'm in line with, doing this stuff and pretty connected to God, I look to God for those things. But when I'm not, it's like the drink. I'll chase it to the depths of, what is it? Insanity or death. I will do the same thing to meet these needs. But it looks different. It's not as obvious. It shows up in isolation. It shows up in attention seeking. It shows up in all kind of blame. It shows up in victim. It just doesn't, it's just not as obvious, and it kind of hides itself. So I need to be willing to honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. The first honest thing I think I really admitted to myself and have to admit to myself every day, which gets deeper and deeper, and I concede more and more, is that I am an alcoholic and my life depends on this, and my life will always depend on this. it's almost like the further along I am, the more my life depends on this, because God, like, hear me? You know, without God in my life, and without you guys in my life, and without me being honest, I have to be willing to do these things. I have to be willing to show up in uncomfortable situations. I have to, a big thing with my children was, I would come out of these like sprees, because that's what it was. I was not having fun. I would go out and drink when I was a teenager, I'd go out and drink for one night and spend 5 or 6 days freaking out because I couldn't go home because I was so petrified. It wasn't like I was out there having a good time. Time goes on as I lose my kids, and it was like I would come out of this haze and recognize the destruction and the pain and I couldn't live with that. And so it was just this cycle. Like, I understand that I drink because I'm dependent on it, and I have this but I couldn't live in the reality that I had created. Like, my reality was a lot. To the point when I came to AA, I didn't tell anybody I had children probably for about 3 years, which, that's heavy. Oh my God, but then the floodgates opened, and every single meeting I went to, I would tell you about all of it, But anyway, I don't know. I don't know what else to say. Like I said, I kind of went through a period of just like this period of heaviness. And a couple weeks ago, I just kind of got the inspiration that I'm just supposed to be quiet. Reach out for some help. Look at these things which are blocking you from God, and do some work. That's all I have.